"Ma'am, I need you back behind the rope. Are you even on the list?" The voice came from a young sergeant in a pressed service uniform, and it carried the particular flatness of a man who had decided, in the space of one glance, that the person in front of him did not matter. He was 24 years old. His name tape read, Tolliver. He had been given a clipboard and a stretch of white nylon rope and a 2-hour window of authority, and he intended to spend all of it. The woman he was speaking to did not answer right away. She stood on the grass a half step past the rope in a faded blue jacket, her hands folded in front of her, and she looked at him with an expression that had nothing in it he could use. Not fear, not offense, only a kind of patience that made him feel, absurdly, like the one being measured. She stepped back the half step he had asked for. She said nothing. It was midday on the parade field, and the sun came straight down out of a hard blue sky onto rows of white folding chairs, onto the covered memorial wall standing under its flag drape at the front, onto the families filing in with their programs held up against the glare. Flags along the edge of the field hung and lifted and hung again. Near the front, where the brass sat, a general's aide checked a watch and then checked it again. At the center of the field, a ceremonial honor guard was forming up under a master sergeant's low voice, a dozen soldiers dressing a line by inches. She moved like someone who had stood in far worse lines than this one and been told to move along in far worse weather. She folded her hands and she waited. Tolliver turned to the specialist beside him, a thin kid named Cobb, with a phone already half out of his pocket. "Somebody's grandma wandered off the parking lot," he said, not troubling to lower his voice. "Keep an eye on her. I don't want her wandering into the shot when the wreath goes down." Cobb grinned and said nothing, which was the safest thing Cobb did all day. 30 feet away, the master sergeant running the honor guard lifted his eyes from his line for the length of a breath. His name was Darnell Whitaker, and he had spent 20 years learning to read how people stood. He did not notice the woman's face. He noticed the way she held her weight, square, settled, still, and the way her stillness did not waver when the young sergeant leaned into her space. The master sergeant had buried friends and trained strangers and stood 100 details in the rain, and he had learned that stillness like that was not the stillness of the lost. It was the stillness of someone who had already survived the worst thing that was ever going to happen to her, and knew it. He filed it away. He had a line to dress and a program to hit on the second, but he did not put it down. The wall had taken 2 years to build. The stone had been quarried and cut and trucked in from 3 states away, and the names had been checked and rechecked against records that went back a decade, because the one thing worse than leaving a name off a wall like this was spelling it wrong. It was meant to honor a specific war and a specific set of losses, and the community had raised the money a bake sale and a fun run and a hardware store donation jar at a time, and the general had come because the general always came to these, and the families had come because for many of them, this stone was the only grave they would ever get to stand in front of. It was, in every way that mattered, a holy afternoon dressed in folding chairs and box lunches. And the woman in the blue jacket had come a very long way to stand in front of it, and had gotten out of a rental car in the far lot alone, and had walked in past the rope on a leg that did not fully bend, and had told no one who she was, because telling people who she was had never once made anything better. At the rope, Tolliver was already looking for his next thing to manage. He raised his voice to the junior soldiers nearest him and called a facing movement to swing them clear of the aisle, and got it wrong, called it a half beat-off on the step instead of the halt. The 2 young privates crossed their own feet and stumbled and recovered. The woman in the blue jacket watched the detail, the way a musician watches an orchestra play a piece she has known by heart for 30 years. Her eyes moved with the cadence. Her lips shaped a word, the correct command, without sound. Tolliver saw it. "You got a problem with how I run my detail?" he said. She looked at him. She still had not raised her voice. "No," she said. "I have a suggestion if you want it." "You don't." And she folded her hands again and waited. And the young sergeant, unsettled by a calm he could not find the bottom of, decided that the smartest thing he could do with the next 10 minutes was to make an example of the quiet woman who would not flinch. He did not know yet what she was. He was about to build the whole afternoon on not knowing. The privates on the aisle fumbled the next movement, too, a right face that Tolliver called, again, on the step. They came apart at the feet and had to shuffle back into line, red under their covers, and a ripple of soft laughter moved through the folding chairs. The woman in the blue jacket spoke then, quietly, only loud enough to reach the sergeant. "It's right face on the halt," she said. "Not on the step. Call it while they're moving and they'll cross their own feet every time. They're not wrong. You're rushing them." Tolliver's neck went red. Cobb, beside him, laughed. Not at her. At Tolliver. That was worse. "Where'd you learn to run a drill field?" Tolliver said. "Bingo Hall." She did not answer that. She had learned a long time ago which things deserved an answer and which deserved only stillness, and she had a great deal of practice telling them apart. Whitaker crossed a few steps closer, under the excuse of checking his line's interval, and watched her hands. They were folded, and they were steady, and there was a small, tarnished thing at her collar catching the light. A rosette, pale blue, no bigger than a shirt button, worn so plainly that a person would have to know exactly what it was to see it at all. He could not read it from where he stood. But he read the stillness again, and the way nothing about her hurried, and that was the thing he could not put down. An elderly woman 2 chairs in, a Gold Star mother, by the pin on her cardigan and the folded flag she held in her lap, rose to move toward the aisle and caught her foot on the uneven grass and pitched sideways. Before anyone in a uniform could react, the woman in the blue jacket was there. She did not lunge. She simply arrived, a hand under the older woman's elbow and another flat against her back, and steadied her and turned her and set her down into her chair with an economy of motion that read, to Whitaker, as something more than kindness. It read as command, as the reflex of a person who had spent years being the one who got other people to safety. "Thank you, dear," the Gold Star mother said, and patted the hand at her elbow, and then held on to it a moment longer than a stranger would, the way the bereaved sometimes do when they find, unexpectedly, someone who does not flinch from them. "You're all right," the woman in the blue jacket said. "I've got you. Take your time. The wall isn't going anywhere. That's rather the point of it." The Gold Star mother laughed, a small, wet, surprised laugh, the first real thing she had felt all morning. She looked up into the plain, weathered, calm face above her, and for a moment something passed between the 2 women that had no words in it. One who had lost a son, and one who had failed to save a boy, meeting on the only ground they truly shared. Then the moment closed, and the younger woman straightened, and the older one settled into her chair with her folded flag in her lap, and the ceremony went on, assembling itself around them. Whitaker almost went to her then. He almost crossed the last 30 feet and said quietly, "Ma'am, do I know you?" Because something in the back of his memory had begun to turn over. Some old briefing, some photograph on a wall. But the program NCO's voice crackled in his earpiece. 2 minutes to the invocation. Dress the line. And the ceremony reached out and pulled him back to his place. And the moment closed. And Tolliver, watching the master sergeant nearly break formation for the old woman he had just called a bingo hall grandmother, felt the last of his patience burn off. He decided she was a problem, he decided he would solve her. He came back to the rope louder than before, playing now to the nearest rows of folding chairs, to the families with their programs and their glare-squinted faces. "Let me guess," he said. "You saw the flags and the free chairs and figured you'd sit up front with the important people. That how this went?" Cobb lifted his phone and started filming, holding it low against his hip, the way people do when they think no one can see. "I was asked to come," the woman said. "Asked." Tolliver smiled at the chairs. "Sure you were. Everybody here was asked, ma'am. That's what a guest list is. That's the whole idea of a list." He tapped his clipboard. "And funny thing, you're not on mine." A staff officer's aide, moving fast along the front with a folder pressed to her chest, glanced over at the small commotion by the rope. She saw a squared-away sergeant and a scolded old woman, and she read it the way the uniform told her to read it, and she flicked 2 fingers at Tolliver. "Handle it," and kept moving toward the dais, where the empty seat at the front of the guest of honor row was beginning to worry the people whose job it was to worry about such things. The families near the rope looked away. There is a particular embarrassment that settles over a crowd when it watches someone be diminished and decides, one person at a time, that it is not their business. It settled now. A father in a golf shirt studied his program. A teenager found something fascinating in the grass. A woman leaned to her husband and murmured that surely the sergeant knew what he was doing, and the husband murmured back that surely he did. And both of them went on looking anywhere but at the rope, because it is easier to trust the uniform than to trust your own 2 eyes when your own 2 eyes are telling you that something is wrong. That is how it always happens, the woman in the blue jacket thought. Not with cruelty, with politeness, with a whole field of decent people each deciding, separately and reasonably, that it was not their place to say anything. She had seen it in mess halls and airports and waiting rooms, in the small daily arithmetic of who gets believed and who gets waved along, and she had long ago stopped expecting a crowd to be braver than a crowd knew how to be. She did not hold it against them. She only noted it, the way she noted weather, and filed it with everything else she had learned about how people behave when they are certain of the wrong thing. The woman in the blue jacket took none of it personally. She had been diminished by louder men in worse places, and she had learned that the crowd looking away was not cruelty. It was only fear, wearing its ordinary clothes. She did not take the seat she had been steered away from. She stood, instead, near the rope, hands folded, and turned her face toward the honor guard, and watched the young soldiers dress their line, and waited for the thing she had come a long way to do. If you have ever watched the young mistake quiet for weakness, stay with this one, and subscribe to the veteran vault. The insult was set now. All that remained was for it to find out what it had been aimed at. Tolliver should have let it go. A wiser man would have. But humiliation is a debt, and he had decided the quiet woman owed him, and he went looking for a way to collect. He found it at her collar. He leaned in and squinted at the small, tarnished rosette pinned there, the pale blue button worn so plain it looked like nothing, and his mouth twisted. "What is that?" he said. "That little pin? Some garage sale thing? A church rummage sale?" He shook his head, warming to it, certain of his ground. "You can't wear a pin here like it means something, like you earned it. People earned things to be on that wall. You don't get to walk in off the lot and cosplay it." Whitaker, 30 feet off, heard the word pin and turned his head, and this time he did not turn it back. "I'm going to walk you to your car," Tolliver said. "Come on, let's go." And he reached out and took her by the elbow. She did not pull away. That was the thing that would haunt him later, when he understood. She did not flinch, did not resist, did not make a scene. She simply planted. It was not a large motion. It was a settling of weight, a small immovability, the way a piling stands in a current, and her arm did not move where he pulled it, and she looked at him with those patient eyes that had nothing in them he could use. "You don't want your hands on me, Sergeant?" she said, very quietly. "Not today." It was not a threat. That was what unnerved him. A threat he could have answered. He knew how to answer a threat. He had been trained for threats, had rehearsed the escalation of them in a classroom with a laminated card. This was something else. This was closer to a warning given for his sake, the way you would tell a boy the stove was hot, not to frighten him, but because you did not want him burned. It came from above him somehow, from someone standing on higher ground, and he could not for the life of him understand how a lost old woman in a garage sale jacket had gotten up onto higher ground than a United States Army sergeant with a clipboard and a rope. So he did what men do when they feel the ground shift under them and refuse to look down. He pressed harder. "The pin comes off," he said. "Right now. You do not get to wear that here. I don't care where you bought it." His voice had gone thin at the top, the way a voice does when its owner has begun, somewhere he will not admit, to be afraid. Cobb kept filming. Up in the second row, a Gold Star father half rose from his chair, uncertain, then sat again because no one else had moved. The aide was gone. For one long moment, the woman in the blue jacket stood alone in the wrong, with a young man's hand on her arm and a field full of people deciding it was not their business, and she bore it the way she had borne worse, without a word, without a flinch, without letting any of it reach her face. Tolliver's grip tightened. And then, he never could explain this part. Not to the first sergeant, not to himself, not for years. Something in the way she turned her wrist inside his hand, some small economy of leverage that he felt more than saw, made his fingers open on their own. He let go. He had not decided to let go. His hand simply knew something his pride did not. That was when Whitaker stopped being able to stand at his line. The master sergeant came across the grass without hurry, which was its own kind of speed, and his voice when it arrived was low and flat and left no room at all. "Sergeant," he said, "take your hand off her. It's already off. Keep it off." Tolliver rounded on him, still riding the last of his certainty. "Master Sergeant, I'm removing an unlisted civilian from a secured—" "Look at the pin," Whitaker said. "It's a garage sale. Look at the pin, Sergeant." Whitaker wasn't looking at the pin. He was looking at her face now, and something had gone very still and very careful in him. The stillness of a man who has just recognized the edge of a thing much larger than himself. The memory that had been turning over in the back of his mind since the first time he clocked. Her stillness came all the way up. A briefing room, years ago, at another post. A slide on a screen. A photograph of a young sergeant at a ceremony. A president reaching up to settle a pale blue ribbon around a neck held rigid at attention. The instructor's voice. "This is what right looks like. This is the standard. Most of you will never meet it, and all of you will spend your careers trying." He had been a younger man then, and he had looked at that photograph and thought, the way young men do, that heroes came stamped out of some finer metal than the rest of us. And here was the finer metal, standing at his rope in a plain jacket, being shoved toward a parking lot by a boy with a clipboard. Whitaker felt the whole weight of 20 years land on him at once. And then close your mouth and stand exactly where you are, and do not move, and do not say one more word. I am telling you this to help you. In about 2 minutes, you are going to understand why. He said it low, under the crowd noise, so the families would not hear. It was a mercy. Tolliver was too far inside his own humiliation to know he had just been handed one. "She's nobody," Tolliver muttered, because he had to say something, because a man that age would rather be wrong out loud than corrected in silence. But even as the word left him, it felt wrong in his mouth, too big and too small at once, and some cold part of him had already begun to suspect that he had just said the single most foolish sentence of his life and would spend a long time paying for it. Whitaker did not even bother to answer him. That was the thing that finally reached Tolliver. Not anger, not a dressing down, but the master sergeant simply declining to argue, the way you decline to argue with a man about whether the train is coming while the man stands on the tracks. Whitaker had moved past him already, in his mind, to the only thing that mattered now, which was making right as fast as he could, a wrong that had gotten much larger than one sergeant's pride. The woman in the blue jacket did not even look at him when he said it. She was watching the honor guard. The wreath detail had begun its slow turn toward the covered wall, and her eyes were on the cadence of their feet, and whatever she was feeling had gone somewhere far down where none of them could reach it. Whitaker keyed the mic clipped inside his cuff. "Program, Whitaker," he said quietly. "I need you to confirm the guest of honor's name for me, and I need you to confirm whether she has checked in." A pause, the earpiece murmuring, his jaw set. "Because I think she's standing at my rope, and I think one of my sergeants has had his hands on her." What the boy in the pressed uniform did not know is what the next few minutes would teach him. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Whitaker stepped back toward his line, his eyes never fully leaving her, and the wreath detail came on, 30 seconds out, and the field tipped toward the thing it did not yet know was coming. She was 22, and the mountains did not care. That was the first thing the mountains taught her, and the last thing they let her forget, that they were older than every reason anyone had climbed into them, and that they would still be there, indifferent and enormous, long after the trucks and the men and the war had gone. She had learned it on a resupply road in the winter of 2012, on a switchback so tight the vehicles had to swing wide and blind around the shoulder of the mountain, one at a time, into whatever was waiting on the far side. Something was waiting on the far side. The lead truck took the first rounds at the apex of the turn, where it could neither go forward nor back, and the world came apart in the flat, hard way it always did. Not like the movies, not a swelling roar, but a series of small, precise cracks, and then everything at once. The convoy commander was in that lead truck. He was down in the first 10 seconds. The truck commander of the second vehicle was down in the next 20, slumped in his hatch. In half a minute, the escort had lost the two men, whose whole job was to tell everyone else what to do, and the mountain did not care, and the fire kept coming down, off the high ground in a long, raking line. Sergeant Ridgway came out of the third vehicle into a ditch on the low shoulder with her rifle and her radio, and no illusions. She did not remember being afraid. People asked her that later, the ones who were allowed to ask, and she never had an answer that satisfied them, because the truth was unsatisfying. There had not been room for fear. Fear is a thing you feel when there is time, and there was no time. There was only the next thing, and then the next thing after that. She got on the net in a voice that came out steadier than she felt, and she named what she could see, and she told the gun trucks where to put their fire, and she started moving the wounded downhill toward the low ground where the mountain's own shoulder would shield them. It was 31 degrees on that road, and the wind came down the pass like something with a grudge, and she would remember the cold longer than she remembered the fire, because the cold had stayed with her all day, and the fire came in bursts. She would remember the smell of diesel and scorched brush. She would remember that the lead truck's radio was still keyed and squealing, and that somewhere under the noise, a young voice was counting. One of the wounded, counting out loud, the way a scared kid counts to keep from screaming. And she had used that counting as a metronome, had moved on the beat of it without ever deciding to, 1 and 2 and 3 and lift. She was a sergeant. She was 22. She had 11 people on that mountain, and she had already lost the 2 who were supposed to be in charge. And so she was in charge. And being in charge, she would learn, was not a feeling. It was a series of decisions you made faster than fear could catch you, and then lived with for the rest of your life. She carried the first one herself, a 19-year-old gunner with a ruined shoulder, across 40 meters of open ground, with the dirt jumping around her boots, and she set him down behind the wheels of the rear vehicle and went back. She carried the second one the same way, a driver with a broken leg and a face gone gray, and she set him down beside the first and went back. The third time she went back for Nash. Private first class. Tommy Nash was 19 years old, and he was the radio man, and he was pinned at the lead truck, at the apex of the turn, in the worst place on the whole mountain, and he was calling her name on the net in a voice that was trying very hard to be a soldier's voice and not quite managing it. She went up the shoulder for him with 2 other soldiers laying down everything they had, and she reached him, and she got a hand into his gear, and for one moment she thought, she let herself think, that she was going to bring all 3 of them home. Then the burst caught them both. It took her right leg out from under her, and it took something out of Nash that could not be put back. And the mountain did not care about that either. She got him onto her back. She could not stand, so she did not stand. She went down the shoulder on the leg that would still bear weight, and the one that would not, dragging both of them. And she would not let go of him. And when she reached the low ground, and the medics pulled him off her, they told her with their faces what their mouths were still too kind to say. She carried him anyway. A body is not a man, but you carry it anyway. Because you promised his mother something without ever meeting her. Because you promised it the moment he became yours to bring home. The 2 she had carried out lived. That was the part she held on to, on the nights the mountain came back for her. The gunner with the ruined shoulder had a daughter now, and sent her a card every year in February, and the driver with the broken leg had written her once to say he had named his son after nobody in particular, just a name he liked, except that the name was Thomas. She had read that letter standing up in her kitchen and had to sit down. 9 of 11 came off that mountain alive because a 22-year-old sergeant would not stop going back up the shoulder. She knew that. She could recite it. It never once weighed as much as the 2 who did not. There was a citation afterward. There were words in it like conspicuous gallantry, and above and beyond, and at the risk of her life above and beyond the call of duty. And the words sat strangely on a page about a 22-year-old sergeant from a small town who had only ever wanted to do her job and bring her people down off the mountain. She had not felt gallant. She had felt cold and furious and bone-tired, and she had felt the specific private failure of the one she had not been fast enough for. And none of that was in the citation, because citations do not have room for the truth, only for the facts. There was a medal, pale blue, that a president hung around her neck while she stood at attention on a leg that would never again be whole. There were 2 years of surgeries after that, and then a third, and a medical board that said, with great gentleness, that the Army could no longer use the things she had left on the mountain, and a retirement that no parade had ever quite closed. She had carried all of it into a hot parade field on a hard blue afternoon, folded up small and quiet inside a plain woman in a faded blue jacket. And a boy with a clipboard had looked at the pale blue button on her collar and called it a garage sale pin, and told her she had not earned the right to stand near the wall. She had earned the wall. Part of her was already on it. The program stalled. It stalled in the small, invisible way that ceremonies stall. The invocation ran long. The chaplain reached for another sentence. The aides at the front conferred behind their folders, with the tight faces of people who have lost something they are responsible for. The seat at the head of the guest of honor row was empty. It had a folded program on it, and a small printed card with a name, and it was empty. And the general who was supposed to be handed a woman to honor did not have a woman to hand. Tolliver did not connect the empty seat to the woman at his rope. He had built his whole afternoon on not connecting things, and he was not about to start now. Not with the master sergeant watching him, and the specialist's phone still filming, and his own humiliation sitting in his chest like a swallowed coal. He needed the woman gone. If she were gone, the last 10 minutes would go with her. "Mom," he said, "I'm done asking." And he took her arm again, harder this time, and pulled. She let him move her. That was the thing Whitaker saw, crossing the grass. She let the boy move her 1 step, and then a 2nd step, her weight going with him just enough that a watching crowd would not see a struggle. And then, on the 3rd step, she stopped. She did not brace. She did not set her feet in any way a camera could catch. She simply stopped being movable, the way the mountain had simply been the mountain, and Tolliver's pull ran into her stillness and died there, and his own momentum rocked him half a step forward past her, while she stood exactly where she was. "I have been moved by better men than you, Sergeant," she said, very quietly. Not for the crowd. For him. On worse ground, and I did not move for them either, until I was good and ready. There was no heat in it. That was what made it land. She was not fighting him. She had simply informed him, the way you would inform a man of the tide table, that the thing he was trying to do could not be done, and that his belief otherwise was a fact about him and not about her. She had been small and quiet her entire life and had learned young that small and quiet was not the same as movable, and she had spent one very long morning on a mountain proving it to people far more dangerous than a boy with a clipboard. He was not going to move her. He was only going to find out in front of everyone that he could not. Cobb lowered the phone. He did not decide to. His arm simply came down, the way Tolliver's fingers had opened on their own a few minutes before, because some animal part of him had understood, before the rest of him did, that he did not want a recording of this, that he did not want to be able to prove to anyone, ever, that he had been standing here filming when whatever was about to happen happened. Whitaker was already moving. And at the front, under the flags, Major General Vincent Alcott, 56 years old, 2 stars, 34 years in the Army, a man who had handed out a great many medals and stood over a great many walls, turned his head at last toward the small commotion at the rope, because a general develops an instinct for the one wrong note in a field of right ones, and this had become a very wrong note. The program NCO reached Whitaker at a fast walk with a clipboard held out, and a name on it, and a face that had gone pale. Whitaker took the clipboard. He read the name. He looked at the woman in the blue jacket, and then he looked at the pale blue rosette at her collar, close enough now, finally, to see it for exactly what it was. For one held second, Tolliver saw something in her face that did not belong to a lost grandmother. It was not anger. It was something older and quieter and infinitely more dangerous, the face of a person who has already paid the highest price the world has to offer and has nothing left that anyone can take. He let go of her arm. He was, without knowing why, afraid. Whitaker read the clipboard a second time to be certain, and then he went rigid. And then he did the only thing a master sergeant of the honor guard can do when he realizes that the woman his sergeant has been shoving toward a parking lot wears the pale blue ribbon of the Medal of Honor. He turned to face his detail. He filled his chest. And in the ceremonial voice that carries to the back of any field, the voice that stops a crowd cold because every soldier's spine remembers it before their mind catches up, he called it. "Detail!" Whitaker roared. "Attention!" The honor guard snapped up as one body, a dozen heels cracking together like a single rifle shot, and the sound of it rolled across the field and killed every conversation it touched. Into the silence, Whitaker turned to the woman in the faded blue jacket, and his voice changed entirely. It went soft, and it went formal, and it shook, just slightly, at the edges. "Sergeant First Class Ridgway," he said. "The wall is yours, ma'am. It always was. Please, come forward." The name moved through the front rows like wind through wheat. Ridgway. Ridgway. Somewhere a program rustled. A page turned. A printed name matched at last to a living face, and a woman in the second row put her hand over her mouth. Major General Alcott rose from his chair. He crossed to the microphone, and then he did not use it. He stepped past it, out from behind the dais, into the open where the whole field could see him, and he faced the plain woman in the plain blue jacket, the woman a sergeant had called a bingo hall grandmother, the woman a specialist had filmed for a laugh, the woman who had been told she had not earned the right to stand near the wall, and a 2-star general of the United States Army brought his hand up in a slow, deliberate, flawless salute, and he held it. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alcott said, loud enough now to carry without any microphone at all, "the Medal of Honor. On your feet." The field stood. It stood the way a wave rises, front to back, the folding chairs scraping, and the programs falling, and the families surging up out of their seats, the Gold Star mother in her cardigan, and the father in the golf shirt, and the teenager who had found the grass so fascinating, all of them on their feet now, all of them turned toward the small woman by the rope. The honor guard held the general's salute, 12 hands frozen at 12 brims, and Tolliver stood in the middle of all of it, at the center of the standing field, and his face ran the entire distance in the space of 3 seconds. Confusion first, then disbelief, then the terrible dawning recognition, and then the horror, pure and total, as he understood at last whose arm he had held in his hand and tried to drag toward a parking lot. A general does not salute first. That was the thing the older soldiers in the crowd understood, the thing that put the hand of the retired sergeant major 3 rows back over his own heart and the tears down his face before he could stop them. Rank is saluted. Rank does not salute down. There is exactly one exception written into the whole architecture of military courtesy. One person to whom even a general renders honors first, regardless of grade, and that is the man or woman who wears the pale blue ribbon at their throat. Alcott had 34 years, and 2 stars, and a corner office, and he stood in the open grass and held his hand at his brow for a woman a sergeant had called nobody, because the Medal of Honor outranks everything, including generals, including pride, including the entire long ladder of who is allowed to look down on whom. The crowd might not have known the regulation, but they felt the shape of it. They felt a large man make himself small in front of a small woman, and they understood, without being told, that they were seeing something true. The woman in the blue jacket brought her own hand up and returned the general's salute, crisp and certain, the salute of someone who had rendered and received a great many of them. Then she lowered it, and she walked, with the small limp she had carried out of the mountains in 2012 and would carry for the rest of her life, up the aisle between the standing rows, past the empty seat with her name on it, to the covered wall that had been hers all along. The rows she passed did not clap. Somehow they all knew not to clap. They only stood and turned to follow her with their eyes, and let her pass through the middle of them in a silence that was the loudest sound the field had made all day. She did not gloat. She had never once in her life gloated. She had watched too many good people not come home to ever find anything in a moment like this but the weight of the ones who were missing from it. That was the whole of it. That was the whole of who she was. At the wall, she took the corner of the flag drape in her hand, and at Whitaker's nod she drew it down, and the names came into the hard blue light, column after column of them, cut fresh and deep into the pale stone. And near the top, in letters as clean and permanent as a promise finally kept, was a name the field did not know, and she knew better than her own. Tommy Nash. The rest of the afternoon belonged to other people. That was how she wanted it. The reckoning came quietly, off to the side, the way the important reckonings usually do. A first sergeant with a face like a closed door took Tolliver by the arm, gently, which was worse than roughly, and walked him 20 paces from the crowd, and Whitaker came with them, and the two senior men stood over the young sergeant in the shade of a flagpole and said the things that had to be said. Tolliver did not argue. There was nothing left in him to argue with. He had gone the color of the stone wall, and he kept starting to speak, and then not speaking, because every sentence he reached for ended in the same place. "You're relieved of the detail," the first sergeant said. "Effective now. Report to me at 0800 Monday, and we will discuss what else this is going to be." He glanced toward the wall, toward the small woman standing in front of it. "And it may be a great deal else." "First Sergeant," Tolliver managed. I didn't know." "No," the first sergeant said. "You didn't. That's the whole problem, Sergeant. That's the entire problem, right there. You looked at a person and you decided you already knew everything worth knowing about her. You decided it in 1 second, off a jacket and a pin, and then you spent the next 20 minutes making the whole world agree with you." He let that sit. "That's not a discipline problem. I almost wish it were. That I could fix with paperwork. This one you're going to have to fix yourself, and it is going to take you a lot longer than a Monday." It might have gone very badly for him. A formal action, a reduction, a mark that would follow him the length of whatever career he had left. It should have, some would say. But it did not. And the reason it did not was standing at the wall with 2 fingers resting on a 19-year-old's name. And when she saw the 3 of them under the flagpole, she left the wall and came over, with her small limp, and she stopped it. "Let it go," she said. The first sergeant blinked. "Ma'am, with respect, this soldier put his hands on." "I know what he did." Her voice was quiet, but it was the quiet that had stopped a young sergeant's hand on its own, and the first sergeant closed his mouth. "I was there for all of it, and I am telling you that he is going to carry this afternoon a great deal longer than any paperwork you could write, and a great deal deeper. He is 24 years old. He was handed a rope and a little authority, and he did what small men do with a little authority, and today he found out what that costs. Let him learn it standing up. Not on his knees. Standing up. It's the only way anybody ever actually learns it." She looked at Tolliver then, directly, for the first time since the reveal. He could not hold it. His eyes went to the grass. "You want to make it right?" she said to him. "Come help me fold the drape. And then you're going to stand here with me a while, and I'm going to tell you about a boy on this wall who was younger than you are now, and you're going to listen. Not because I'm making you, because you finally want to." She turned back toward the stone. "That's the difference, Sergeant. That's the whole difference between this morning and right now. This morning you didn't want to hear anybody. Learning to want to. That's the thing they can't put in a citation, and it's the only thing that was ever going to save you. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault, and let this soldier's story find the people who need it." The crowd thinned as the afternoon went long and gold. The chairs emptied. The families drifted toward the parking lot Tolliver had been so eager to send her to. The brass shook the hands that brass shakes and moved on. The honor guard folded away with the crisp economy of men who did this every week. And Whitaker, before he went, came and stood in front of her and did not say very much, because there wasn't very much a man could say. He simply looked at her, and then he saluted her again, slowly, on his own time and not the general's, and she returned it. And that was the entire conversation. and it was enough for both of them. And then it was quiet, and the light was low, and she stood at the wall with her hand flat against the cool stone under Tommy Nash's name, and a young sergeant stood a respectful pace behind her, holding the folded flag drape in both arms because she had asked him to, and because he didn't know what else to do with himself. "He was 19, she said, without turning around. Tommy. He was 19 years old. He had a mother in Ohio, and a girl he wrote letters to, and he was scared of exactly nothing, which was the most dangerous thing about him." She traced the cut letters with 2 fingers. "I went back for him 3 times. I got everyone else off that mountain. Him I could only bring home." She was quiet a moment. "That's the pin, Sergeant. That's what the garage sale pin is. It's not a thing I earned. It's a thing I owe. Every day I'm still here, and he isn't. I owe it a little more." Tolliver stood behind her with the flag in his arms, and he was crying, silently, in the ashamed and total way that young men cry when something has broken open in them that they did not know was there, and he did not try to hide it, and he did not try to speak, because he had finally, at the cost of everything he had thought he was that morning, understood. He would remember it the rest of his life. He would make Sergeant First Class one day on a different post in front of soldiers of his own, and there would be a day when one of them was tempted to be cruel to some small, quiet person who did not seem to matter, and Tolliver would take that soldier aside and tell him a story about a parade field and a garage sale pin and a general who saluted first, and the soldier would not fully understand it, the way Tolliver had not fully understood it until it was almost too late, and Tolliver would tell it anyway, because some lessons can only be handed down and never taught. That was what she had given him, standing at the wall. Not a punishment, a story he would spend 30 years trying to be worthy of having been in. "Yes, ma'am," he said. It was all he had. It was, for once, exactly enough. She let her hand rest on the name a moment longer. Then she straightened, and she turned, and she looked at the boy holding the flag, and something in her face softened by a fraction. Not forgiveness given, exactly, but forgiveness made available, set down between them where he could reach it when he was ready. "Come on," she said. "Walk me to my car. I hear the tours don't come back this far." And the 2 of them went down off the parade field into the long gold light, the decorated woman with the ruined leg and the humbled boy with the folded flag, past the empty chairs and the lowering flags and the wall full of names that would stand there in the hard light and the soft light and every light after, saying the only thing a wall like that has ever had to say, which is that some prices were paid, and the paying should not be forgotten, and the quiet ones who paid the most are almost never the ones who tell you. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.